Hi everyone, is this working okay? Can everyone hear me? Okay, well, first of all, welcome everyone. I want to thank Stephanie for the very generous invitation and everyone at Art Basel Hong Kong for the smooth organization. And of course, I want to thank Binna, Hoor, Shubigi, Ade and Farid for being present today. As Stephanie mentioned, I work at artworld, which is a research center based at St. Louis and Martins, University of the Arts, London, and we focus on the one hand, the history of exhibitions, and on the other, the single work of art. So it's really relevant to have artists, curators, artists as part of the panel, because we are here to talk about, how trajectories in global exhibitions and the reinvention of the exhibition as a medium, and the model of the biennial more particularly. I'm just going to give a very short introduction to the way this panel has been framed. It's been framed twofolds. It is, in a way, an homage to the late Okwui Enwezor, but not an homage that is looking backwards, but rather it is trying to honor his work and ideas and reorient them for the future of exhibition making. As probably everyone in this room is aware, but nevertheless, I'll reiterate some of the most relevant things that form the basis for this conversation. But with events like Documenta 11 in 2002, and his research around what he called the post-colonial constellation, Okwui Enwezor signaled the inclusion of the post-colonial subject in the international art scene, which until then was, still mostly Western-centric. And undoubtedly, he was one of the most cogent thinkers and organizers around questions of the blurring of cultural frames and the emergence of the global art world in the early 2000s. The challenges faced by artists from former colonies and the global south. He also saw a political and ethical responsibility for curators around the work on mega exhibitions and museums as transnational global forms, as he really, eloquently wrote about. So we're going to talk here about exhibitions as site of translation of the realities of the non-Western world, and what we could call a global, progressive, emancipatory internationalism. But before we encounter exhibitions, we encounter names, their titles, and as Stephanie already mentioned, the title of this panel is also the title of a biennial recently curated by Hoor, which you took from Okwui Enwezor. So I have a very general question to start with. How did you go back to that title, and how did you appropriate it and expanded it to rethink a biennial project?
Hello, hi, thank you. Thank you, Stephanie, and everyone who organized and invited us. It's always great to be back here on the same stage. Thinking historically in the present actually was the title Okwui chose for the biennial. I invited Okwui in 2018 to curate the 2021 edition of the biennial. I was already working on 2019, which was meant to open, but I always like to invite curators early because it takes time, and paperwork takes time, communication takes time. And I was, I'll tell you the whole story, the whole background. I was in Dakar Biennial at the stage in the conference, and I was texting when I had a phone. I was texting my colleague on the other side of the hall saying, I'm thinking of the next biennial and I can't get Okwui out of my head. Do you think he would do it? Because we all knew he was very sick at the time. And he said, well, just go to Munich and ask him. And right away, Okwui, of course, he was always a supporter of Sharjah Biennial. We were all, inspired by the work that he did. That's why when you said the ethics of curating, like how that it's responsibility and ethics of curating in our parts of the world. And for us, this is what we got from Documenta 11 or Johannesburg or everything that Okwui has worked on. So when I said the 15th edition of Sharjah Biennial, he said yes, and went back to something he mentioned in a previous March meeting, thinking historically in the present. And in the email, one of his later emails to me, it said the title, Thinking Historically in the Present. Sharjah Biennial 15, Thinking Historically in the Present. So the title was very much chosen by Okwui. He wanted to do a part 2 of his trilogy, the post-colonial constellation, as a museum show. That became complicated with the whole issue of what was happening with the pandemic and doing a museum show versus a biennial where you invite artists. But he left me a set of keywords, post-colonial keywords, and everyone who worked with Okwui knows that he always liked to put keywords together to help artists also kind of think and address the situation. So he left me with the keywords, but I spoke to him and asked him what should I do, because we knew that he wasn't going to be around to make the biennial happen, and he said, you do it. And at the beginning, I thought I had this responsibility to do his show, the post-colonial constellation exhibition, which everybody wants to do. Everybody wants to do Okui's show, everybody wants to be Okui's friend, everybody wants to be. But I didn't think it was my place to do it. So I put together a working group with Tarek, many other people who were close to Okwui, just to help me figure out what my responsibility is, what should we do, and what can a place like Sharjah Biennial do. So I hope that answers a little bit of how it went. Yeah.
And just for the audience, the slides are showing on loop. So whenever you see images from Sharjah, feel free to comment, and anyone can just get back to the slides anytime. But maybe since you're next to me, Shubigi, the biennial you curated is titled "In Our Veins Flow Ink and Fire." So could you just tell us a little bit about this quite intriguing title?
The title is actually from a drawing I did for a book that I wrote. And it's really about something I believe in quite fervently. And I needed to use make a title from something I was responsible for. So I would be responsible for ensuring that the title made sense and bore fruit. And it comes from my fervent belief in the transgressive power of storytelling. And in the fact that more than ever, I think that the inability to listen to each other is one of the reasons why it's so. I think we talk at cross purposes a lot of the time, and I think that one of the reasons why I agreed to curate this biennial was that it's the same reason why I left India 20 years ago. It was the nepotism in the art world as I perceived it as a younger person, which hasn't changed. So here was the first time that I had the power to do something about it. As an artist, what power do you have, right? So I knew that I needed to right at the outset say this has to be angry. It's okay to feel rage. It's okay to feel this kind of powerlessness. What is, and in my curatorial note, I mentioned this as well, the biggest enemies are apathy and despair. And its bedfellow, self-censorship. The Kochi Biennial is remarkable for one really major thing. I really think this is true after everything, even. It's one of the last few places where you can openly critique regimes, where you can openly critique ideologies, you can make work and show work that you can't show in a lot of places, very often including the places you're from. I'm Singaporean, by the way. And I think that it's incredibly liberating, and that's borne out by the work that the artists did, and just the way they work together. All of us work together, especially towards the end of this, what I call nicknamed the perpetually postponed Biennale. We postponed a total of 2.5 times, by the way. Twice because of the pandemic, and the last one was in, what can I say? For all of you who flew in on the 11th, I'm so sorry.
Thank you so much, Shubigi. Maybe a different, register, but in terms of its name, Natasha Binna. So that's, maybe that's for you.
Yeah, I have a Korean passport, but I've been working for Singaporean institution. On that note, I think my take or my approach to the Biennale is really not dealing with critique or explicit resistance to any status quo, but thinking of what is something that connect many actors and stakeholders together. So within Singapore Art Museum, which is hosting the biennial, there are the board members who's working in financial sector, real estate market. I myself have been working for this notion of commons and like post-capitalist future. And what I wanted to do wasn't necessarily critique about capitalist word. And I think among the biennales that we are dealing with here, this is only one, Singapore Biennial 2022, actually not 23, conceived in the middle of the pandemic. So invitation came January 21. And then I had to go through also loss of my family members during this preparation of the biennial. So I'm not only one who undergoing this kind of situation. In a way, this is the condition, human condition. Basically, we for long have been forgotten about. So rather than critiquing or rather than making another stage for research, we wanted to have something more personal, intimate, or familiar by calling the Biennale with a name. And the name happened to be Natasha. We had Natasha and Brian, and it was very clear we can't take Brian. It had to be woman. It had to be fairly common, not a divine name. So we are not dealing with divinity or godness, but common people, among them like people with femininity. And what happened when you give a name something, or when you cannot give a name, or when you cannot even call a name, or say a name. So relationship among humans, relationship between human and non-human. Yeah, that's what we wanted to deal with this Biennale.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you so much. And I mean, at this stage, everyone already touched upon, questions of the biennial, as a space for different politics, as a space for different kinds of coming together, of assembly, etc. And everyone's already touched upon questions of organization, which I believe is a good way to move to a presentation of Lumbung, if it still needs unpacking. So Farid and Ade, can you maybe do not hesitate to repeat things that have been said, but yeah, over to you.
Who wants to start that? Yeah, maybe shortly. Lumbung is, we came up with the term, I'm sorry if many of you might find me like a broken record, but like it is a vernacular term, and a lot of Indonesians know what Lumbung is, if not all Indonesians, so it's not ours. We just use it as a shortcut. We use it sort of shortcut for ourselves to explain to each other, ourselves as well, what we're trying to do, experimented with, and all those kind of stuff. We've played with the notion since at least 2016, 2017, and then we just use it to invite documenta back at that moment to be part of our journey, no? Because it was was already our journey, and then of course it got kind of like mandated, bifurcated, and all those kind of stuff, with documenta being part of the journey by now. But then I think this is the best time to pass over to Ade. It is not a theme, but it is a working mechanism, and then everything else afterwards become consequential, at least from my understanding. De, please.
Yeah, it was. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone here as well. So it was actually more like approach it like more as like trying to develop sort of like a mechanism or organism rather than exhibition per se. You know, like we didn't really search for particular artworks, for example, but we are more interested in like the way of working, what kind of value they have, what kind of practice they were like all the conversation with the artists. Unfortunately, was like I think most of the conversation is actually happened during pandemic, so it's like it went online. We did. Yeah, it was strange as well, you know, but I think we kind of like finally we can use it. When it went online, we tried to also think like maybe we should really try to meet someone that maybe almost impossible to meet physically. So that's what happened as well. So it's really about really talking about the practice itself rather than like what kind of works. So, because there is no sort of like centralistic. There's no center of theme, for example, that to refer to. So it's more like about values and working environment, talking about like how they work with their ecosystem and so on. So and then it went on and on and on. Of course, because it's Lumbung, it's a value that practiced and like just like adding Farid, it also consequence as well that we have to change a lot of things in the or try to change a lot of stuff in the how documenta as sort of like organization is actually working, or like exhibition as people know it, or even exhibition as in, for example, like the choose of venues and so on, like because it's all by assembly, by majlis, even venue decided by majlis. So it's like most of the venues is actually took months. Few actually, if you were there in Kassel, like yeah, I think maybe almost half of the venues is really finally decided together with us, with artists. Through majlis, some like even more than 6 months, through the conversations. Yeah. Sorry, just adding.
No, thank you. Well, I don't know, because with Lumbung, there's obviously, creates a kind of, it confronts the very idea of exhibition making to its own limits. So, as you know, as much as there might be a legacy from Okwui, I also wonder how everyone else, apart from Ade and Farid, obviously, how what was everyone's take or to Lumbung.
Shall I go?
Is there a lesson from Lumbung? Are we learning from Lumbung?
Of course. I mean, I have to say, documenta. I went to the closing. It was amazing. It was brilliant. It was an important addition, and I continue to wait for Lumbung to happen in Sharjah and everywhere else. I think it's amazing, and I think it's great that artists are doing biennials. My background's an artist. I just left the art world pretty early and focused on curatorial, not my practice, but I like the idea of doing things collectively, but it's also, I find it not practical. So I am
Not at all.
I'm very much of a control freak. I arrive at the venues before the security arrive in the morning to open up. But what I do is I work with the whole team. I work with the install team, I work with the education team, I work with the, I'm with the kids that play outside my office, I work with everybody. That's a different kind of Lumbung, but at the same time, I chase the artists. I work very closely with the artists, but like you see Iftikhar's work in the market, for example. Iftikhar came, looked at some spaces, Iftikhar and Elizabeth's work, and said, oh, I like this space. And Iftikhar, I'm the curator. I'm going to decide where your work goes because I know the spaces and I know what we can do. So sometimes it takes putting your foot down a little bit. But it was definitely a collective experience. We're a very big team at the foundation, and it really felt like teamwork. And when people ask me how long did it take to do this biennial, I say technically 4 years, but it's 20 years because a lot of the buildings that we use are buildings that we've been using or restoring for a long time, or semi-renovating. And the buildings also are in communities. So 2 of this Sharjah Biennial took place in 5 cities in Sharjah, and 2 of them, Kalba, where we have the new, we've used the factory before, called the Ice Factory, Fish Feed Factory, turned Ice Factory, turned Art Space. But it's just undergone the renovation, with a new renovation with architects from Lima. And the first time we used the farmland town in Al-Zaid, which is an old clinic. Both those places, we did a local opening before we had art world people coming to see it. We did our own little local majlis, formal, but very much community, old people talking about their stories there. So 8 a.m. opening, and then by 10, a lot of the art world people came. So that's always important, to do our own thing in each community. So it's not about the art world that are coming in. So I think Lumbung takes different forms, right? It depends, like all your communities and people that you work with. And then the opening very much was about that, and the March meeting, and this continued programming throughout the biennial. And I think that's what worked at Documenta. It's not about the opening. It's just about come anytime and participate and take part. There's so much to do and so many communities that you engaged with. So I think, I hope that answered something.
No, that's excellent. But in a way that it's a question of that concerns every curatorial project, every exhibition project. It's a question of the negotiating between letting go and control. So you're on one pole, but there's another pole, and but at the end of the day, it's how how is finding a balance between the creation of a publicness, but also satisfying the work of the work of artists. So, Shubigi, maybe you could say a few words about that.
Sure. I think Lumbung is such an incredible, strong word and concept also, and it's something that is nascent and apparent, and I absolutely agree with you, Hoor. It exists already in these different forms in a number of what are sometimes dismissively called regional biennales. And a regional biennale is simply one that doesn't occur within the Euro-American sector, right? But actually, what could be more regional than, say, I don't know, Whitney? Yeah, sorry, but really. So if you actually look at so-called regional biennales, they have incredible importance for their communities as well. And the communities are multiple. We're not talking a single community here, like a single so-called local community or regional community. So when I started actually the curatorial exercise for Kochi, before I wrote my curatorial note, because I'm excessive, I wrote a 3,000-word essay while I was traveling and in hotels, in airports as I was waiting to board flights, extremely jet-lagged. And the 3,000-word essay started with one very simple thing about questioning the idea of regionality and asking what does community mean, right? And it's important if you're curating a biennale like Kochi, because local people have a very strong sense of ownership over the biennale. Okay, it's very much a locally embedded biennale. It's an artist-initiated biennale, always curated by an artist, but it's almost like we're immaterial to the actual mechanism of the way the biennale is operate. Once it opens, it's not yours. Not that it ever really was. And I normally don't number drop, but in the first 3 months, 2.5 months, there are 500,000 visitors to this edition of the Kochi Biennale. And almost all these visitors are South Asian. And it's critically important to ask why it's so important that this is mentioned. And it's because this operates, like you were saying, yes, you have the art world mechanisms and all of that. But for the Kochi-Muziris Biennale, this edition, we didn't have an opening week. We had no opening program, no events. The art world came in and left before the opening, as you know. So who was this Biennale for? It was for whom it always was meant to be, which is the people who live in the region, for whom this Biennale, they waited for this Biennale 4 years because it was postponed for two extra years. And this has so much embedded meaning that what you curate is almost just on the surface. And that's why when I went for, since you asked, the artists that I looked at and the artists that I eventually selected, I was not interested in bringing art to Kochi. That's a terrible way of thinking, frankly. I looked at what Kochi already was, and I had one advantage. I was an artist in an earlier edition, and I stayed in Kochi to make my work. So I kind of understood, also as an ex-Indian, I understood sort of, what the pitfalls were with coming in from outside as someone who had not lived in India for 20 years, what the possible pitfalls were. And all the artists that I looked at were artists whose practices had a particular specificity of regionality. Each one's work dealt with something specific to their region, but could also be universally, immediately understood and embraced. That was actually the most important thing. And it was a way of collapsing these false boundaries that have been sort of set up in a lot of, but now I'm talking outside the art world, of course. But I think that is, in a sense, an extension, if I may say so, of the post-colonial constellation, because people already live this way. In the art world, we're having this discourse, but this has existed as practice in so many communities already. Kochi, for instance, is so ancient. It used to trade with Mesopotamia and Babylon. So, I mean, if you're talking about sort of, cross currents and connections and confluences and influences, it's been colonized by 4 different tiredness. 4 different European colonizers, which means that there's so much multiplicity and collision of things. It's a Marxist state, but it's also the center for Catholicism. And it's got the highest literacy rate for women, higher than the United States, by the way. And yet at the same time, you don't see women in any of the reading rooms that pepper the city. So there are all these incredible contradictions that you have to be very sensitive and aware of. And I think that curating Kochi was such a remarkable exercise. Despite everything, I would do it again in a heartbeat. Because very rarely do you get the chance as an artist curator to work so closely on the ground because for me, working, like you said, working with the teams on the ground is the best. They're the ones who get it up. It's never, in my case, it was not the institution that got the Biennale up. It was all the people on the ground, including the artists. We had Indian artists who had finished install and left. They flew back in to help finish the rest of the installs, loaning bright sign players and things like that. I didn't send a call out asking for help. People pitched in. I saw solidarity and community in action when it's just mostly words and buzzwords. I saw it in action. This Biennale went up in 10 days. And we had everything up in time. And why it's so important to emphasize this is because it was really against all odds. And people pitched in because things were so dire. My only counter to this is we should not have to have pain and suffering to have community.
That's a really strong testament for, the work that is done on the ground and being actually open to the unexpected. And unfortunately, there's the official calendar and deadline, etc. But in the end, it's always a negotiation with what you actually do with the concrete daily work. And which in the end it is always experimental, if you want. So yes, Binna, how did that work for you, and also in relation to your work around the commons and commoning?
Well, speaking of commoning or the commons, Lumbung is another word for commons, or commons is another word for Lumbung. So it would be all of our job to find the language for commoning, because it's what we are doing, and this is what sustaining life word, basically. Yeah, maybe I tried to connect with also Okwi's legacy in a very weird way, and then commons and Lumbung, that I learned about Sarah Maharaj through documenta Okwui curated. And what I remember from his text is importance of footnote. And I feel like Singapore Biennial, I'm not trying to be diminutive at all, but it's like a footnote to Lumbung. So it's a footnote. If you touch that footnote has asterisks, maybe it makes sound. So like from my personal situation of mourning for like passing of my sister and being at home mostly, taking care of families in the middle of pandemic, not going to many shows, it wasn't usual like social group or community that I was think with. So it was either families or like whole existence. What this human existence or this existence, planetary existence is. So on the one hand, I personally was very unambitious, like on the verge of not doing art, but thinking a lot about like caring, maintenance, families and kinship. But on the other hand, I become kind of megalomaniac in thinking of human existence and history of human and this civilization, what it is, and then how come we come this far that just for last 70 years we use up all our resource and going through this like chains of death here and there, but still going on without radical change. That I think led us to bring a lot of works that you can't identify with any word or existing intellectual concept. It is more like training for different kind of sensibilities, navigation between process of abstraction and refiguration. So as soon as you about to identify something, you lose what you identified. So like losing it is a part of experience. So a lot of complaint from public in Singapore. But we didn't complain. There are also I think beautiful intimate relationship were shared. So there were some people writing letters to Natasha, writing poems about Natasha. So speaking of the footnote to Lumbung, I think it is more to bring a little bit more like spiritual dimension and feminist dimension, which has to do with care and vulnerability and resilience. And again, I would put it personally because I have 3 other colleagues in this team, and I'm very happy to be footnote to Lumbung, and then we keep commenting.
Thanks so much, Binna. What I'm hearing in what's been said is that well, at some point you have to find a way to translate the personal or the what is usually, you know, in the background or hidden from the kind of official appearance of the exhibition. And in a lot of the cases that we're talking about now, this is coming to the fore as it is, but also maybe like in the case of Documenta 15, but it's also translated as in the case of Natasha. And I think that raises a question of, of scale, which is already an issue that Okwui addresses in his writings from 2001, 2002. The question of the scale and the spectacular nature of these mega transnational exhibitions. And, it's been a while that people really wonder whether biennials and such mega events should continue, in that form, at that scale, at that frequency, and sort of like, keep feeding the, the global cultural industry of the spectacle. Maybe Ade, do you want to?
Yeah, well, yeah, scale. One thing. I mean, like just like trying to reflect what's with the process. I think documenta give us also kind of like quite good duration. I think to do the process. I don't think I couldn't imagine that with the same approach that we did in Documenta 15, we can do it in Biennale. I think it's too short. It needs like all the majalis that just mentioned, for example, all the building up of the whole thing, because it's like really based on trust, based on transparency, based on and like who just mentioned, it's totally unpractical. It's disorganized. It's or different kind of organization. It's unpractical. It's not efficient. So be careful. but for sure, it's more beautiful.
To make sure everyone knows what we're talking about, can you just like remind us of what the majelis are? Also, because there is also live interpretation. The majelis.
Majelis. Majelis is we use that. It's Indonesian, or bahasa is Indonesian word, but it's of course
from Arabic.
From Arabic means assembly. That's when we use the form of meeting, gathering, in conversation, to share a lot of stuff, experience, knowledge, stories. Sometimes to decide, sometimes not. Sometimes it's just like more like hangout mode, without any goals. That's what we sort of like. It's really unproductive. I remember during the one of the Uta is here. I remember when we were like doing interview, like one of the jury of from the founding committee was just like asking us, like so there's no exhibition. And we explain again, and same person says like, I don't think you need exhibition. So, but I think yeah, it's that way, but it's more than exhibition, and I think it's I mean if we can see also how we work and how we live, I mean like ruangrupa as not as a collective, yeah, as organism, it's all senses, So I think when people know about ruangrupa, they will see it's yeah, that's it, and what we also share and what we being connected, like all the solidarity and all the networks, it goes that in that kind of like sort of organism and network. So talking about again scale, I think like really like a lot of people asking about like the scale. I think that's also one thing other than time. You know, like I think we need time to do that to a certain process. So and also the scale. So we never really think that it's actually sort of like something small and then become like erecting, you know, like big like that. But it's more like what I call it small or medium but many. So like actually thinking about it's actually a connection of small units. It's actually like the hardest part is actually how to stitch it. But when you sort of like a pre-process, or like the process is actually going into a certain good direction or like certain way, it's actually sort of like it organically it will find its ways as well, you know, like because I think that's also the trust, and it's very artistic and poetic process.
I think this is really crucial, and I'd like to get back to that afterwards. But maybe Farid, you want to add something? Otherwise, I think I feel like Hoor, you wanted to make an intervention. Yeah.
No.
Question of scale and
No, yeah, well, yes, true, that's true. No, I just also want to say that because my role here is different, because I'm also directing the biennial and I ended up curating it. So my responsibility was to the team. So that was very important. And I pushed the biennial by 2 years because, you know, artists weren't ready. Some artists lost people close to them. It was too much stress on our team. So I thought, let's just take our time and do it properly and find more partners to collaborate with. And of course, that's also an excuse that it's bigger. But what's really important for me, for the longest period, I've been pushing to decenter the biennial. So I always wanted to not only have things in the city center. Everybody says off-site. No one's allowed to use the word off-site in the office. It's not off-site. It's biennial that's happening in 5 cities in Sharjah. And each city doesn't have 1 or 2 artists. It has an exhibition. And that made a big difference, actually. And there was this scare also happening because we started early. We'd started installing in December. So it's another thing about a little bit the control, because we know that we can get the spaces ready. You know, the spaces were selected. We know the spaces. Some of these spaces I saved from demolition in 2010, 2011. You know, so we know the space. We know the team. We know, so that made it easier for us. And we took our time to install, definitely. It was a lot of pressure, but from December till February, we were full install mode. And because we were in 5 different, we're one team, but going to 5 cities all the time, driving around. So I think it's large in scale because it's a biennial and it's important, and I believe in biennials and what they do to the cities, because I've been running Sharjah Biennial for 20 years now, but the reason I became an artist and wanted to be involved in the biennial is because I grew up with Sharjah Biennial since I was 13. And I know what it does to people in my generation, but also people who grew up. A lot of the people in the team who are working with me were doing workshops as children with me. So that, you know, means a lot. You know, people who've grown up in 20 years of Sharjah Biennial. And also working with artists closely. Nobody's work was compromised in this biennial. You see, we had over 150 artists, but everybody had a lot of space. You know, it wasn't crammed, it wasn't squashed. And I think that's also really important, the relationship with artists and not compromising on the work. And, you know, trying to find a solution together for things, but quality. You know, someone was saying, oh, Sharjah Biennial is losing its experimental edge. I said, why? Because we're not rough and ready. We can't have, because we're not from, you know, like, I don't know, the new museum or Whitney, we can't have a beautifully installed work. No, we want to have, this is our job. We're curators. We want to have things installed in the best way. We want to have good technology. Artists spend years making their films. We've spent years putting this biennial together. We want to produce the best quality, and we want people to take their time. So when people are rushing, oh, it takes so long to see the biennial, I said, well, you know, you're limited, but people who are there have time, and they come every weekend, or they do a road trip, and that's what's important. Like you were saying, Ade, as well, you know, take time. And a lot of our films in the biennial, that's Iftikhar and Elizabeth's work. Doesn't it look better? Um, but then, but you know, like taking your time, we had artists whose films are an hour long. Bushra Khalili's film that we commissioned is an hour long. People sat and watched it. Coco's Fusco's film is really long. People sat and watched it. Amar Kanwar. People make a commitment for the works that they want to see. And I had one artist, Alina Mota, who said, oh, you have a lot of film-based works. Maybe I make a short film because people don't have time. I said, don't compromise your work because people don't have time. Because your work is something that will go on. And if the few people who don't have time don't have to watch it, people want to watch it, they will sit and watch it. So that's my idea of going big.
So to use Ade's word, like in your case, the stitching is very tight, like it's all very well orchestrated, and you know, it's almost like a gluing, conducting. Yeah, I don't know if Shubigi you want to also respond to the same question. Also, as you know, as an artist, you know, curating and working on a different scale, and you know, working with other artists.
The best thing about curating as an artist is you can always smell the bullshit. So you always know when a work has fidelity, like it has fidelity to the idea, and it's so much fun. I can't even tell you. I really enjoyed the whole, anything to do with the curating process was tremendously enjoyable, and I think there's also, in honesty, just a lot of the conversations I had with artists. You don't even have to look skeptical for them to know they need to strip away some of the promo they're doing when they speak to you. So I mean, at the outset, the conversations are great fun. So that's the first thing. And I'm ensured, despite the loss of momentum that happens when you postpone twice, despite that, and despite the pandemic and the rigors it placed on artists, who lost studios, production facilities also closed down. I'd originally planned to have a lot of production happen on site in Kochi or in different parts of India. At one point, I was very keen also on having artists come in and do residencies with institutions in India in different cities. So it's not Kochi specific, right? And the idea was then to partner with institutions and break away with some of that competitive aspect that institutions tend to have in a scene, right? A lot of this, of course, didn't happen. The pandemic is a big reason why. I think also, I mean, it just became impossible to factor in things like how do people travel and do a residency? How do people even produce work on site? So much work became digital or virtual. We had 40% AV works in this edition of the Biennale. That was not intended. Kochi is a difficult place to watch film or to watch sort of durational work, right? Partly because, as you know, like you were saying also in a Biennale, people have shorter attention spans. Biennale fatigue is very real, okay? But there's another factor, and that's the climate in Kochi. I'm also really aware that as a not-for-profit organization, there's only so much that we can spend on air conditioning and things like that. So there were all these really practical aspects to trying our best not to have too many films. But because of the pandemic, when artists started switching to film or video, other media that required people to stay and be more durational, you know, the works were more durational. Like you, I felt that it was very important to not compromise on that. So I found a way for those works to exist, for those works to go up, and for them to be enjoyed in the way they intended to be, with no sound overlaps as much. And even though we couldn't even afford soundproofing, the works really function really well. We figured out how to deal with bounce, acoustic problems, all of this, and this is all in a very short duration. And that's because as an artist, I work on the ground. I'm always on the ground. There's no question of being like giving orders and walking away. It's not, that's just not possible. Any artist here, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you're doing production or installation, you're there on site all the time because you know you have to be. It's not about people following through on a plan. It's about you have to respond specifically to the concerns of your site and what else is happening around you. And I think that that's really beautiful. So people always talk about the spectacle of the Biennale, right? But I think that's the after image of the Biennale. That's what people see when they visit it, right? What you see when you work in a Biennale, when you work on Biennales and you're part of them is very little to do with spectacle. It's grit, it's hands-on work, and it's actually it's ecstatic work. I love it. I think there's just so much trust that you need to have with the teams of people that you work with. You don't get to work on that scale very often, and because it's done over a number of years, it's really impressive. I think that I'm just really riffing off of what everyone has said already so far in terms of time. I know there's been this sense that, especially with the Kochi Biennale, that we kind of lost momentum. The first artist list came out in 2020, February of 2020, I think, if I'm not wrong. We had to postpone very soon after. But it didn't matter. To me, I didn't see it as a loss of momentum. I saw it as now extending the conversations further. My main worry, which turned out to be valid, was that the venues, the venues are not owned by the organization. They were going to be closed for all those years. They're not used. And it's tropical climate. When I finally got to see the venues in July of 2022, roofs had fallen and there was major structural repair that was needed. And this was actually a bigger concern. So, I mean, I know everyone talks about the spectacle and this thing about how huge the Kochi Biennale is. It's South Asia's largest visual arts event, and it goes on for 4 months, massive amount of visitors, so on and so forth. I don't think of those things. I think of the particular. I think of all these things. The scale of the problems are actually more important, I think, to also talk about. Having said all of that, we talk about spectacle and we talk about, do we need biennales? Of course we need biennales. I'm going to be very unequivocal about this. As someone who works really low-key and small-scale as well, but also can work really large-scale, I think scale is always emphasized. Size, I don't care whether it matters or not. It should not dominate the conversation. I think the quality of the content is more important, the conversations that emerge because of it are more important, and also what communities are you serving. All of that is way more important. So scale and spectacle, why should that be reserved only for the art world or for people who think consumption should occur at that level? I think that's why I argue for spectacular regional biennales. Go for it. I mean, why not?
When you mentioned, biennial fatigue, immediately I had in mind the question of the audience. Who do we do that for? And I want to ask each of you, how do you sustain a non-art audience? I think that relates to the question of doing things off-site, but which we shouldn't call off-site. But the multiplication, diversity of programs, of types of ideas and practices that are presented, or like this conversation, which is free and open to all. So yeah, I don't know if each of you could say something about sustaining a non-art world audience.
Yeah, may I? Yeah, well, maybe it's a good time as well to explain where we're from, no? Like, at least in Indonesia and Jakarta particularly, no? Like, we knew about biennials by being involved in like Jakarta, Jogja, Jatim, East Java, and then Makassar. It is like proliferating in a sense, but luckily, I don't know, fortunately or unfortunately, for better or worse, it's most of the time it was kind of like being born by the ecosystem. So it's not like, but it's not always. There are some cases like that, but in practice, it can be taken by those people who could be feeling the impact. Or the ecosystem, or the society, or the community, all those kind of stuff. Because of that, I think like the question of who are we making certain things for, and then before documenta, maybe we could say that like exhibition or biennial or event, we use it as an alibi. Afterwards, maybe we become older and wiser, then we say it vehicle, but it remains true, at least for us, what Shubigi said as well, no? It can be, like the conversation became something else, how to sustain certain things. So it's not a destiny, or it's not an end in itself. And then I think up until now, a lot of things like that are very valuable, and then those valuable things are actually behind the screen, for those who are a part of the team and all those kind of stuff, it sustains. And then it's not always artistic that way. And we don't have to push it always be an aesthetic or like, you know, translate it into something that can be understood aesthetically and all those kind of stuff. At least with this experience so far in ruangrupa, being an artist, being whatever it's called, because yeah, we don't want to call ourselves as curators because we're not, honestly, no. But yes, those experiences at least like give us those or sharpen our practices that way. That like many things are actually we do it for ourselves and then the people we're working with, and then luckily this notion of the people we're working with keep on expanding, and then I think it's where we're at least right now.
Yeah, I think just different place or different city or different country have different kind of public. So like relationship with public can be very amiable, but it can be disturbing as well. Like you can keep tension with them. So again, that also goes back what Shubigi said. It's not about numbers either. It's like quality of relationship relevant for a place where Biennale takes place. And but specificity of Biennale as it emerged with this like neoliberal globalization, with a lot of city or country wanting to have attention from other part of the world, that there is very interesting like heterogeneity in its ecosystem. So like within the public, it's really composite of many in different sector of society and different hierarchy. So this is a moment when you can have like festive together, but you also can bring disturbing agenda to think about and inquire and carry on together. Well, what else? I wanted to address this unproductivity a little bit, because what happened to us, so we had actually a lot of, like, we felt this resistance to like exhibition technology, how that cut off like life of an artwork or artist. So how do we able to share with the public to touch on life of artists as well as like life matter in general? And what happens with that question is actually decentering what art is and then what curating is. So in terms of decentering what art is, we came to have quite a few works that don't look like artwork. So like fermenting soya sauce in a tiny house that looked like birdhouse, but situating that in a residential block, which you can see many different house building. But in terms of decentering curating, there was like indetermination or confusion among curators and our own habit. So we were moving between like having control over every single things, especially given that we gave name to the Biennale instead of title. We felt like we had to be on top of every single thing and very different in every single things. But in retrospect, it just left a lot of things that we couldn't do. And I'm thinking, what if that we could find a curating like similar to like this project called Library of Unread Books by artist Himan Chong, which he asked people, his friend, but also general public, just to donate the books they didn't read. And he and Rune Starr, the co-initiator, just stack up the books and place them. And the core of it is resourcing and gifting, and then sharing and then using it, and with least labor as possible. So it is one of the key for curating that I like to think about.
Thank you so much, Binna. So maybe we could shift the conversation from, scale and sustaining multiple audiences to sustaining artists or non-artists in the case of, people fermenting soya beans or, other practices that are either at the border or completely outside of the art world. How do you think about sustaining social practices in general, intellectual practice, intellectual work, in the form of books or otherwise?
I think for us, it's always, as an institution, we have a learning team. So we already collaborate. We have adult learning, education, children's education. We have a community program. We have reading, like a book club. And we have a university program. And the university in Sharjah also now put Sharjah Biennial in their curriculum, and Sharjah Architecture Triennial, which is another thing, also on their curriculum. And I heard that somewhere in China they're going to put Sharjah Biennial on their curriculum too, apparently. So it's been really, really good. We had a lot of universities coming out, from the Apple to Yale to Karachi, a lot of students, universities coming. So that's one thing that the institution is always responsible for. Sometimes the curator can help, but as an institution it's important to make sure that these things happen, because the curator is not there the whole time, and you have to program for the whole 4 months. One thing that, addressing biennial fatigue, it was very important for me in this biennial to have benches everywhere, to have public water fountains everywhere, trees, shade, and of course food, toilets, clean toilets, and all of these things that you forget when you think of the idea of curating a biennial and looking at the space, but then realizing people don't want to spend time in a long time in a place if they're uncomfortable, and if it's hot and there's no shade. And so I think to make people spend time with the work, you need to make sure that they also feel like they can enjoy it and not have to rush through it. Another example is there's a space which all of you, maybe whoever's come to Sharjah knows about, in front of our office, in front of the museum, where children play. And every biennial edition, there's an artwork that happens in that square. And everyone was waiting to see what I'm going to do, because I was basically brought up there. So what are you going to do there? I said, well, the first thing I'm going to do is remove the lampposts that the children keep breaking. So there are no lampposts in the way. And I put a water fountain in the shade. And we just opened up, because this is their square. This is where they play. So they kind of take over and inhabit the space. So that's also important, because it means you're listening to the people who are in the space and you're working together. And I think people who have visited the biennial, maybe there was a lot to do, but what I felt came out of it, people were energized afterwards. I had people who were coming very exhausted, but left full of energy, because they spent time there and they looked at things, and they didn't feel like they had to do this biennial circuit. There are a lot of biennials in the world. Nobody can be everywhere, and nobody has to be at every opening. But the matter is that you need to not compromise your project where you are because of the people that don't have time.
No, I think this is really relevant, and I think it also touches upon a word that is in a lot of people's mouth at the moment, and which has been mentioned here a couple of times, which is the notion of ecosystem. And also Charles Escher, for instance, has said recently that the discussions around exhibitions should shift towards this idea of ecosystem, which comes from thinking that was shaped in like system theory or the ecological movement. So maybe the obvious would be Farid and Ade, since it's something that you've been talking about, that you've written about in the context of Lumbung.
Yeah, I mean it's it's also really related to what we've done as well in Jakarta, for example, because it's like just Farid just mentioned. I mean, like our practice is really coming from the grassroots as well. So it's really also about like so sustaining it is actually about also making mutual connection, exactly like one organism with other organism in all the ecosystems, you know, like, so it can be like a big, small, micro, but like how is actually sort of like different scales, different duration, different how it's actually like breathed together, like what we. And with that, we really realized that one of the Lumbung is actually the space, actually, because that's how we think, that's how we senses, that's how it's a bit like not only heart, but it's also like the brain, the nose, all the sensoric, our sensorical, it's through space. That's why we did in Arnhem, for example, for Sonsbeek 2016, and then for Documenta, we did like 1 year before. So it's almost like when we appointed, we immediately. Different with Documenta, we actually already planned from before that we're going to plant Ruru House in Kassel. That's like 1 year, 2 years, 1 year. Yeah, so it's like really a 1.5 year before the actual event. So it's just like, that's like two friends with families moved there, like really like setting up ruangrupa in Kassel, you know, and we. That's how we work. That's how we digest. And talking about, you mentioned also about public. That's also that, because we cannot think different, or like we cannot work other than using that kind of like sensorical tools. And from there, you know, like all the connections, organic relations, friendships, hangouts, spending times together, you know, like with people, with space, with all the cities, and then we believe that, you know, like, and then from there, you know, like that's become sort of like the bridge, because it's really become sort of like something that you can. Because we have a big question during the process as well, actually, about translation, like how not to extract, you know, like how not to just like ship one practice from one space which is rooted in somewhere, you know, non-Kassel to Kassel, right? But like how to make like really almost mechanistic mood that it can actually going back to where it's belong. So in terms of artistic knowledge, even resources, you know, like that's what we sort of also really having lots of tight negotiation, because it includes also resources, like how it's actually can be going that way. So, and Ruru House like really sort of like a way also to oil that mechanism, because like for example, there's a lot of collaboration with Kassel based initiative, or like German based initiatives, is actually through Ruru House a lot, because Ruru House like will really work like opening up space since like 1.5 years before. Yeah.
That's an absolutely crucial point, because to go back to what I was saying at the beginning, Okwui is saying that one of the ethical and political responsibilities was to try and translate different social political realities in different contexts, but at the same time, being mindful of the localities where one operates. So, I suppose this works differently for each of you, who are you in Sharjah. There's something experienced, live, intuitive, but you also work everywhere. And
yeah, it was the same when I curated the Lahore Biennial in 2020. That really for me was also the experience with that, being out of Sharjah and working with a young team and a new biennial really helped me also figure out what I needed to do to also get ahead of time and be ready. But there I had to be definitely sensitive to lots of things that are happening, but at the same time, you try to push the boundaries as much as possible. I think we did in this biennial. A lot of people saw the works in this Sharjah Biennial. It's just important in how you contextualize them and how you show them, and without, making sure that nobody gets arrested. But that's also a responsibility when you come as a curator, because a lot of times you come with a certain thing in mind, but you also don't want the institution to fail. That's not the point of going to an institution. You really care about the biennial. You want Lahore Biennial to continue. You want Kochi to continue. I think that's also really important. So, as we all know, it's not one way or the other. But there are a lot of issues, as we've seen in documenta, where things were not. You were not able to talk about, like Free Palestine from German guilt. I mean, it's just there, So it's very, very one-sided, this conversation. And I think Documenta really opened everyone's eyes to how, Western-centric all these views are, and how they look at us from one certain point where there are so many issues that are censored in the West that we should also address.
Yeah, and that, if I may add, and that's also, I think we learn a lot as well. I think like everyone in the process with the Lumbung, because it's like how Lumbung is actually the one that hold that, like it's like how it's solidarity, and also like really working. It's like, and then it's become like another majlis. And it's really amazing how it's actually like the artists, not only the artists, like more like everyone that involved with this model. It's something that you're not left alone. I think it's really great also for us. I think for everyone, it's not easy, of course. It's but it's like you do it as like together. Like I think yeah, we learn a lot. I think like everyone learn a lot from that. Yeah.
Can I just add to that? I think when we're talking about decentering, one, and second, when we're talking about centric points of view, what we're really talking about is nodes of control. And yes, there is Western-centric points of view. Of course, that's been very obvious, and Documenta expose that, definitely. There's another concern when you're talking with a country as large as India, for instance, right? And you talk about it also in the terms of the Indian subcontinent. What this really means is we're talking about South Asia, multiple countries, very fraught. There have been multiple wars also in this region for multiple reasons, of course. But also we're talking about nodes of control. It's not only a political idea. So, for instance, the Indian national anthem it says, from north to south, it names the states, right? From Jammu, Kashmir, right down to, like, it goes north, south, east, west, right? The 7 states of the northeast are not even mentioned in the national anthem. The representation of northeast art or anything is hardly present. The northeast only appears in the newspapers for things like Maoist rebels and things like that, which is something you can't talk about in the rest of India. In the Kochi Biennale, I did that. I made sure that there was ample art from the Northeast, but also from artists who are from indigenous practice in the Northeast, which you actually don't get to see very often. Or if you see their work is completely decontextualized, which goes back to something Ade was saying and that I also firmly believe, biennales can be flattening spectacles. It's the very first thing I said when I was announced as curator. In the first announcement only, I said, there's a danger of flattening happening. Like you collect, it's like a collection, you do a checklist and they are all in one place. And that's it. What you've ended up doing is flattening and removing context. And the beautiful, very delicious kind of chaotic unreadability of that context. It's very important that we do not understand everything. You should not come away from a biennale thinking, I totally got everything that was there. I totally understood the curatorial promise. No, opacity is necessary and you should be befuddled and it should annoy you, and it's really important that happens because unknowability is the natural order of things. Right? And for me, this goes into not only the idea of spectacle, how audiences read biennales, but also I think this idea of how nodes of control operate. The exclusion of the Northeast is very deliberate. There's a huge Indian army presence in many of those states, and there's been continuous repression for a very long time. How that plays out in a biennale is also very important. We had intelligence bureau people come question, and there were things to tackle and deal with. I often say I come from 2 secular and democratic countries, neither which are secular or democratic. And the reason I say that is because every country that claims to promulgate or support free speech and free expression doesn't really. And a biennale can be a place where you can really push those boundaries. I'm very open about the fact that even though I did not fully originally intend it, I embraced the fact that this was going to be a very politically centered biennale. And one of the ways to decenter is to destabilize and decenter nodes of control. And in the country of India, we know where the node of control is. It's with the current right-wing government, right? There was a way to counter this at Kochi. And I tried my best, and I really hope it happened. I still don't know, because I think I need some distance from it. But it was important just because it got picked up, it got noticed that there was a lot of presence from the states that no one even knows their names. They just call them the 7 sisters, those states, but nobody knows their names. So I think that a biennale can do so much more. It's the possibilities, and the more fraught the conditions, the more difficult, the more you can do. So I'm a great believer because you know why, you know exactly where the boundaries are. I know exactly where to find loopholes. You can do it. And because at 4 years, I was able to do it. So I also have to say that we talk about the difficulties, we talk about the discourse, but I also sometimes want to bring this discourse down to ground level. I'm saying this as someone who does the discourse a lot. It's the joy of working with artists like this in an arena like this is that you can confront head-on the things that we do not name. Like regime, like fascism, like all these things, you can name it. What you all did with Documenta, I have to say, is just astounding. And it's a huge inspiration. It's going to be like that for years to come. So really hats off to all of you. I'm a huge fan.
Thanks so much, Shubigi. I'm personally with you on everything you said, and I think we can be grateful for Art Basel Hong Kong, so that we can also shift some of the conversations, a bit, far away from other conversations that overshadowed what was actually productive and generative in Kassel. We will open the floor to the audience in a minute, but I'd like to maybe hear Binna on these questions of translating different localities and control, etc. briefly, and then we'll open the floor.
Oh. Control in terms of translocality?
Yes, and translating one reality to the other. I'm saying this because the Singapore Biennale just closed, and but you have to, I guess you working towards Hawaii, so very different localities.
Oh, yeah, I don't know where I should touch on because Singapore Biennial, it's basically like state instrument, all the resource coming from the state, which gather then also resource from like private initiative. In case of Hawaii Triennial, it's all private and community that bring together a lot of in-kind contributions, also making Triennial possible. So I don't know, I didn't understand the question clearly.
Yeah, translating, you know, a context to another, and you know, being mindful of different contexts while not compromising, as it's been also pointed out by everyone.
Yeah, maybe what I can talk about is what I am in relation to Hawaii through Hawaii Triennial. So it was through last edition, which I could visit, that I had this electric connection and kind of moment of awakening that what I've been knowing as a commoning or Lumbung have been taking place in Hawaii for a very long time in the land which recognized and felt as occupied by US military force. Something that I never thought about. And then I've been realizing how many of islands actually have been used as an instrument for militarism. And then how like military regime, in fact, dominating whole world, including South Korea, where I come from, and then Russia and Ukraine war, etc. So what am I as a South Korean who have been living and working in the Netherlands for last 20 years and coming to Hawaii? So I am joining as a learner, someone who really wholeheartedly learning about the struggle of native Hawaiian communities, keeping the land and then keeping the culture as a figuration, storytelling, and healing, survivor technique, all of this. So like decentering about art actually already taking place over there. And then connecting through this learning and connecting, bring many of like friends and colleagues, old and new, so that we can share the realities as well as struggle and then different lessons to share. So please come to Hawaii in 25.
It's been really, really amazing and generative, but I'd like to take questions from the audience if there are any. So please don't be shy.
They're shy, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I think something becomes very obvious, and Hoor, you said you're in a double function. I mean, you're basically overseeing the Biennale, and this time with the curators, I think that's an exception. But in general, I think biennales have become very established, and they became institutions like museums. And of course, they, as you said, like they care for their audience, they care for the locality, they have staff. So there's a lot they have to consider. Then on the other side, we always saw them as spaces of experiment, and in a space of experiment, you should also be able to fail better, as Sarat Maharaj said, and anyway, what is failure? So I think there is a clash and there is a tension between the muscle memory of a biennale, how we did it before, how should it be done, who owns the biennale or documenta, and new ideas of what is this field of art, what is an artistic practice, is an exhibition still the mode of operandus, the modum of operandi of artists? I mean, maybe they moved on. So can you talk a little bit about this tension also between an artistic practice, between a contemporary practice and an institution that naturally is always behind?
Who wants to go first?
Yeah, maybe just like shortly. It's a good one because for us, this is a shortcut again because it's like maybe 2 minutes. Uh, we build like our artistic practice a lot of times is like we build or imagine our own world and institution is part of it. No, so that's why we know or like we thought it was a risk from the get-go how to deal with institution that has different muscle memories. No, so that clash or a possible clash, although I was skeptical myself personally from the get-go, but then it was valuable. It's still like, you know, well, my skepticism was proven, but still I think it's valuable and it comes with a price, but I think as much as it can be done and not only by artists or other parts of the ecosystem, to imagine another type of institution, another type of world and all those kind of stuff, I think that's the reason why we're still doing what we're doing. And then that's also coming back to the consequential. The people we're working with are the ones, like we didn't come up with like, you know, a global south theme, no? But precarity that like we want to learn from just happen to come from certain contexts that are precarious, but we want to know how could they still exist. So because they built their own worlds, which for us again worthwhile to look into. And I think I'm curious, like, you know, like let's call it something else, whatever. But if something happened in, like you're building your own world in Sharjah, when we're curious about, we're always curious about that. And then Documenta actually also provided us, like Ade said, we were privileged to be able, not only time, but also scale and all those kind of stuff, to actually could be able to do it. And I'll stop there. And
Yeah,
thank you.
I have a few examples. You know, some artists, Hadra Wahid, Archana Hande, Hangama Amiri, all wanted to do projects that they said we couldn't do this outside of Sharjah Biennial because it's a risk. We don't know what it's going to look like, but I know that there's a trust there that we'll work together to make it happen. And that was with many of the artists. And I think Biennial is still a place for experimentation, for sure. You know, a lot of them said, I would never be able to do this type of exhibition anywhere else, and I'd really like to try. And that's the curator choosing artists and deciding on a commission. You know, like, it is a risk when you're commissioning an artist, but you have to take the risk, and you have to have faith and believe and trust in the artist. And you know, we're always very honored and pleased to be able to help artists create something that, like Archana's piece that you saw with the lights. She's been working on this for a very, very long time, and she's finally able to do it. And you know, she left the biennial thinking, I don't know what to do now. I want to cry. Because it's been 20 years I've been trying to do this project, and now I'm finally able to do it. So that's the thing, but with the institutional support, that you can make it happen, but at the same time, you have to be able to take the risk and let artists experiment.
I think to go back to what you said, Uta, what's it like as an artist curator, whatever, working with institutions that, as you said, are naturally behind? They will remain, the gap between that would increase if they didn't work with artist-centered curators. So you don't necessarily have to be an artist curator. I think even like Hoor has been saying, Hoor has emphasized multiple times the importance of how to work with artists. I think that's really critically important. As you and I both know, too many institutions are suspicious of artists. I don't know how else to phrase it, but that really is how it is. And they're suspicious of artists' intentions, they're suspicious of agendas, and they're not always sure if they'll dovetail neatly with institutional mission and framework, right? And their perceived outcomes and their goals. It's always productive. Yes, exactly. Exactly. And I think that suspicion is so deep-rooted that it's really pernicious and hard to pull out. But I think that it's important to keep persevering, that just because you got burnt one time, you don't burn down that entire relationship. And if we're going to retain these institutions, or if these institutions are going to continue, they're going to have to continue to also work with people they think are difficult. In other words, artists, or artist-led curators, or artist curators. So I I would argue for this relationship to continue. I know I can't believe it. I sound like I'm almost complicit in a kind of very damaging, exploitative cycle, but it's not always so dire. There are multiple biennales that are so brilliant because of institutions being able to open up over time, right? It takes time, it takes experiment, it takes effort, but there's very often a willingness to listen to each other at various points. And there is a growth that does occur. If we do not believe in this growth, then I think we cannot talk about the Biennale as springing forth or supported from institutions, even if it's artist directed. Then I think that experiment, if we really believe in it, we have to continue this relationship.
We've reached the hour and a half, but I think Binna will have the last word.
Last word.
Thank you, Binna.
Well, I like to think about that, like whether ecosystem need institution, actually, where institutions have been destructing ecosystem. So this relationship between institution and ecosystem, and it's great that Uta, you call it institutional memory, and some memory that is so traumatic, so we need to work on it and erase and cure, and then we need to build new memory. Good last words.
Amazing. That's going to make everyone at artworld really busy for the next couple of years. It's been incredible, so rich, extremely generative, and hopefully everyone learned from each other. So, well, please join me in thanking Farid, Hoor, Shubigi, Ade, and Binna. And thanks for staying until the end. And thanks, Stephanie and everyone.